Bills.
Prise du débat.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Châteauquay-Lacolle. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I would like to let you know that I will be sharing my time with the Honourable Member for Davignon-Matapédia. And thank you also to the member for Berthier-Masquinongé for having raised this particularly important issue. And it's a very sensitive one. For raising this before the House, it's important for all dairy producers in Quebec, but also for those in the rest of Canada and for the many producers in my riding of Châteauguay-Lacolle. It's not political will that's lacking here. I'm very aware that the dairy producers in my region are suffering the consequences of what their industry is going through now quite directly. And our riding is right next door to the United States and has one of the 10 biggest border crossings in Canada, Saint-Bernard-de-la-Colle. I'm very pleased today to say that I clearly support industries that work under supply management in Canada. And of course, the object of today's motion is to deal with these issues in the dairy industry, but I'd like to draw the attention of members to issues in other supply managed sectors, which would be poultry and egg production. In Châteauguay-Lacolle, production of turkeys, chickens, table eggs, and hatching eggs are very important sectors. Indeed, our riding has some 10 rural municipalities. Mr. Speaker, these industries are in full development right now and are supporting many communities across Canada. I want to emphasize that our government fully supports the Canadian supply management system. This is an indispensable tool for family farms and producers that are small or big and that are proudly part of the Quebec agricultural trademark. We are determined to maintain and protect the three sectors under supply dairy, poultry, and eggs. For example, the poultry industry brings in $3.9 billion to farms every year and contributes to Canada's GDP to the tune of $1.3 billion per year. Moreover, this industry provides some 100,000 jobs nationally at the farm, in processing plants, and in other areas. In Châteauguay-Lacolle alone, there are more than 16 poultry producers. We can also take pride in the producers of Canadian eggs. They offer the highest quality product because they're subject to standards that are among the most stringent in the world. In our riding, we also have the luck to have two table egg production sites. And now, Mr. Speaker, I would like to describe the situation, and I think you've already heard this story, before the supply management system was put into place, to show you how much it has become an indispensable tool. First of all, in the 1960s, some provinces started to restrict the entry of agri-food products from other provinces in order to protect their own producers and market risks and their products often wound up in oversupply. Naturally, and because of the supply and demand mechanism, this overproduction resulted in a great decrease in prices. It was at this point that the Farm Products Marketing Act was passed in order to provide essential structure and regulation at the federal level. The national agencies balanced the supply and demand by defining the production levels that are appropriate for each of the provinces. And this is after having taken into account import forecasts. Supply management was first introduced for the table egg industry and later on for the poultry industries. Following that, the hatching eggs industry was added towards the end of the 1980s. For each of these products, the national agency works together alongside the provincial councils in order to allocate production between the provinces in order to meet the market needs fully. All in all, supply management has worked well and continues to do so in the poultry and egg sectors because this system imposes a shared responsibility between the federal, provincial, and territorial governments and farm groups in order to ensure stability and proper operating. Nevertheless, Mr. Speaker, as elected members here, we all have an important role to play in the protection of this system, which has proven itself and can be considered as a model. As the member for Châteauguay-Lacolle, I need to listen to the needs and demands of my producers and keep abreast of issues that affect them on behalf reporting to the government. Mr. Speaker, I want to assure my producers and all Canadian producers by repeating that our government offers absolute support for trade and supply management in the poultry and egg sectors. We recognize the critical importance of these industries under supply management to the Canadian economy, and that is why we are doing everything possible to maintain the strength and profitability of these sectors. More specifically, we continue to support the three major pillars of the supply management system, which is to say production control, import control, and price control. Our government, this hope of our government is also achieved in our efforts to develop new lucrative markets for our agricultural producers, particularly through free trade agreements with major importing countries. We also can turn to other effective means to support the poultry industry, including strategic investments in the areas of research, science, and innovation. The ultimate objective is indeed to help producers and processors under supply management to increase their productivity, to increase their competitive abilities, and finally to be able to maintain the sustainability of their enterprises. Of course, we work in equally with partners in the industries for the well-being of animals. Over the years, we have made strategic investments in this industry, even in the Canadian economy. Now, Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, in my speech, I just wanted to remind people that our government fully supports the supply management system and that we constantly work in the highest interests of communities, producers, and Canadian families. We position ourselves strategically on the international scene in order to maximize our commercial achievements that must be shared between all agricultural sectors, including those under supply management. Our government is very optimistic when looking to possibilities of growth that could flow from our participation in new international trade agreements that will be profitable for Canada. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my colleague for her speech. She has demonstrated that she's been listening to producers in her riding. She's demonstrated her knowledge of the supply management system. But when she says that the government's going to do everything in its power and that they believe in supply management, I think in supporting today's motion, she could walk the talk and show tangibly that she will support the suppliers in her region, that she'll support supply management. We already have had $220 million in losses in 2015 in this sector. How many hundreds of millions of losses are we waiting for before we support them? The Honourable Member for Châteauguay-Lacolle. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I thank my honourable colleague for her question. Indeed, this is a problem. And indeed, I appreciate the fact that this motion's been tabled today so that we can discuss this, because I haven't heard much about this issue over the last 3 years in the House. Mr. Speaker, we are working hard. Our government is seized with this issue. I can testify that the parliamentary secretary is working on this issue constantly. It's going to take some time, but it will come. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions et commentaires?
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Mirabel. Joliette, rather. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My colleague says it's going to take some time, but that it will be solved. What's going to take time? Why is it going to take time to enforce existing legislation? It's simple for us. They only need to do that if they have the will to do so. The honourable member for Châteauguay-Lacolle. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Indeed, as my honourable colleagues have already explained, it's not as simple as that, this problem. It's more complex. It involves several different components and factors within the industry. We have to find a solution that is a long-term and sustainable one that will be to the benefit of everyone involved in this problem. Thank you.
Questions et commentaires? The honourable
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Winnipeg North.
Mr. Speaker, and my question to the member, and maybe just a brief comment, she made reference in terms of just the process of 3 years, and I think it is important that we do recognize that this is not an issue that came from nowhere. In fact, had the Conservative government been active on this issue, and quite possibly, if the NDP, while they were official opposition, been more active on this issue, it might not have hit the point where we've hit it today, Mr. Speaker. And my question to the member is, would she not agree that there is a responsibility for the Government of Canada to work with the industry reps, as it has been doing, in order to try to do what's in the best interest of the industry as a whole, and it is just a question of time, and to reaffirm that the Government of Canada does, in fact, believe in supply management.
The honourable member for Châteauguay-Lacolle.
And I thank the honourable member for his question, because indeed this issue is of the highest priority for this government. It was the first study undertaken by the parliamentary committee. It is an issue that I have certainly been made aware of from earliest days in conjunction with my colleague, who is the parliamentary secretary for agriculture. It is something that we inherited from the previous government, and yes, it's been 6 months, but you will see it will not be 6 years before this problem is solved.
Reprise du